Hi, everyone. This is Brendan Palmer with Chainbridge Technologies. I'm here with Angela Leek from the Iowa Department of Public Health. We're here to talk about the RadResponder Network, sponsored by the FEMA CBRN office, in particular talking about transforming radiological emergency response. RadResponder is the national standard and whole community solution for the management of radiological data. The intent behind the system is to collect, aggregate, and share radiological data to establish a real-time common operating picture, leveraging a robust partnership feature where everyone can collect data and view data in a single event space. The system is comprised of two primary platforms, the first of which is the website, found on www.radresponder.net. This is where you can manage your organization, manage your event, your partnerships. We also have mobile applications. These are more utilitarian applications intended to facilitate the collection, sharing, and transmission of data in real time. The RadResponder Network is a product of collaboration among a number of federal sponsors, primarily the FEMA CBRN office, also supported by the Department of Energy's National Nuclear Security Administration, the Environmental Protection Agency, also supported by a variety of associations and government organizations to include the Conference of Radiation Control Program Directors, Department of Homeland Security, Science Technology, National Urban Security Technology Laboratory, and associations like the National Association of County and City Health Officials.
So from a user perspective, we wanted to give a little bit of an overview of the use of RadResponder and some of the ways that using the system can really help with moving forward through a response with rapid situational awareness, being able to validate the projection models that are in place at the beginning of a response, but then are better validated with field data over time. And so with RadResponder, we're able to have data available from many sources in one place. And we can use drawing tools to help us look at various aspects of the response and use overlays of data products to be able to bring the whole picture together to help us more rapidly respond as an event would go forward. So I don't know about anyone else who does a response for particularly nuclear power plants, but any response that involves a lot of data gathering out in the field. But for us in Iowa, what we had done prior is we would get a call from our field team coordination group, and they would tell us where the field teams were going to go. And we had a big whiteboard in our EOC. We'd take a Sharpie of various colors and mark where our field teams were going to be going. We would have a radio that would allow us to radio numbers back and forth on each of those sampling points that were predetermined. And then we had someone that was responsible for writing all of that information down on a piece of paper and just putting the location as far as Echo 2 or wherever that was. And, a lot of times it's difficult to discern between milli and micro when you're in a hurry and writing those numbers down. So as we get more and more data and more of these pages over time, it makes it really difficult to then compare against the models that we've run, which a lot of times are in various systems as well. We can be getting models from NARAC through the FERMAC system, or we could be getting models from our nuclear power plants, or the models that we're running independently through RASCL or MIDAS or other types of systems. And so when we're trying to compare all of this and we end up with stacks of papers, you can see and maybe have experienced the overwhelming nature of trying to validate the plumes and understand situationally what's going on. So we just wanted to give a little bit of an example here on using RadResponder for a fictional situation incident that we've come up with here. And so as we start with this discussion, the information that was given from the plant in this fictional scenario is that a steam generator tube is ruptured below the water level. And they were able to give us enough information about what was going on at the plant to be able to provide NARAC with some information to generate some initial plume modeling to help the offsites understand where it's possible that a PAG would be exceeded for either the thyroid dose or the Teddy whole body dose. And so by putting the 10-mile ring around the nuclear power plant here, we can quickly see some distance references, and we can look at the model that we were given through the overlay of the GIS product that we're provided with. And we can see that the PAGs are not really expected from this situation to be exceeded past the 2-mile ring. So we're well within the 2-mile ring around the nuclear power plant. And if we work ahead and actually use some of the drawing tools with the facility to create sub-areas, we can show with the layers the various sub-areas around the nuclear power plant. And we can demonstrate that certain sub-areas have been directed to either shelter in place or evacuate, depending on the decision from the decision makers. So in this case, we're going to say that we decided to evacuate sub-areas 1 and 2. And you can see where you could quickly use this as an informational tool to help direct state and locals who are communicating to the public on where these zones are, because the user drawings can be mapped around landmarks that are familiar, like roads and things like that. So based on the information that we knew at the beginning of this, we think we're pretty solid on our protective action here, and we now send out the field team so that we can get some ground truth, because as everyone knows, we don't necessarily want to live with the plume models without validating with some ground truth. So we dispatch out the field teams, and we can continue to use RadResponder along these lines because we can have sample locations that are preloaded for the facility, and you can see those represented here in the little green dots. So we can do assignments to the various field teams. We can ask them to go to certain locations to take surveys or samples, and we can watch as they make their way there. And so you can see, as we added in the responder tracking here, where Brendan has gone for this particular incident. And as the field teams move their way through, we can direct them and know exactly where they are to get better situational awareness on their location, their possible dose, and their relative relation to a potential plume that's out overhead. So as the data starts to come in, we can be watching that data come in, and we can start to begin to validate the model. One important piece for the data is, there are a couple of important pieces, but one particular piece is the thresholds. By being able to set thresholds within the system, we can pick values that correlate into some sort of a number that makes sense for the situation that you're dealing with. So in this case, we would have set the thresholds to represent the DRL, or the derived response level, that correlates to where we would think that a PAG may be exceeded. So if we had done that in this case, and the red could represent for us then what areas we would expect to be exceeding the PAGs. And so if we can use those thresholds in that way, we can start to see here now that all of the red are areas that potentially are exceeding the PAGs. But we also need to be careful that we know that what's being put in by the field teams is valid. And so by having the ability to assess the data and have that show on the screen here, we're able to quickly trust the data that's coming in. So when we look at some of the field data with the green ring around there, we can tell that that has been validated by someone who's taken a look to see what was entered by the field team and then approved that data point to be used in situational awareness or decision making. And if you look a little bit further south from this location, you can see that there's a green finding that is showing up in the middle of the plume where all of the other red are showing. And so that could trigger really quickly for you to call back to that field team and ask about their entry. Maybe they meant to put in an R instead of MR or something like that. Or you can direct a field team back to take samples again in that area if there are questions. So we can see a lot of data just quickly glancing at this and knowing what we can trust, what we can't trust, and gives us that representation to help us kind of look at our initial plume and what we're getting for information from the field. And as we continue to look at the data, we can see samples show up as well. And so where you can see an air sample has been taken, and if there are some initial field readings that are done with that air sample, that can give us some indication as well as far as visually how far out we are getting readings that maybe don't correlate with our initial projections. So as we start to see that and we see the field readings coming in, it tells us right away, very quickly, think back to that slide that we showed a little bit ago where we're having all of the phone calls coming in and sheets of paper with all of these readings and dose assessment coming in and trying to interrelate that. And in this way, all of this data is coming in, it's being validated through procedures and everyone doing the jobs that they normally do. And we can quickly pull it together and ask for another model to be run because we are able to detect that our initial model may not be sufficient. So when we do that, we can see that we get the next model from the NARAC group and we can overlay it, and it lines up a little bit more in line with what our field readings are telling us. And you can also see when you put the rings back on for the distance for the nuclear power plant that we're exceeding potentially PAGs past the 2-mile ring. And so our initial protective action recommendation may not be sufficient, and we may need to be talking to those decision makers about extending any protective action for evacuation or sheltering of the public. So very, very quickly we can use this to help us to continue to guide as we get more information as the situation evolves, to keep our citizens safe and quickly communicate among all the various parties trying to address this incident.
Thank you, Angela. And just as a quick wrap up, we wanted to discuss very briefly about some of the other robust capabilities that might be value added for your response preparedness needs. So some of the things that we didn't show but are incorporated into the overall technology are being able to view different types of data feeds. So from fixed sensors, we have what are known as application program interfaces to be able to feed data into the system. We've incorporated EPA's RadNet as well into the system. We also have these application program interfaces to incorporate Bluetooth equipment that can telemeter data from different detection equipment and technologies, UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles that can send data into the system automatically. We have alarming and notifications built in. So as Angela discussed, the thresholds, if you define your alarms in the system, you can identify certain thresholds and who gets notified in those particular instances. A new feature that we didn't show here is dosimetry. Now users can incorporate dose into their data collection, and people with the right permissions can view that information. So for example, this user icon here on the map would appear to have a green, yellow, or red, depending on the threshold that they've exceeded for their dose. So we can see right away what the status of the field team and responder dose might be. And as Angela discussed, some of the modeling, the GIS tools, you can import and export models into and out of the system. So if you've got shape files, KML files that can add value to situational awareness, the common operating picture, those are easily incorporated into the RadResponder map. You can check out more at www.radresponder.net. You can request an account there. You can also see what's new in terms of technology and some of the outreach and training activities that we're conducting. So that's all we have for today. Thank you for your time. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach us out at support@radresponder.net.